my name is Ilbra Ili, and I'm the secretary at ISACA's Orange County chapter. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we dive into today's conversation, I'd like to quickly review what we do here at ISACA's Orange County chapter. Our aim is to conduct regular chapter meetings and sponsor local educational seminars and workshops like today's event, and bring local industry leaders together and be of a resource to them. Today, our focus is on security leaders and how they meet the objectives of the goals, and the goals that have been set for them as security leaders and also as business leaders. To discuss this topic, we have three wonderful panelists. Our first panelist is Nimi George. His background spans across information security with focus on core technology and mobility solutions. He was initially designing secure remote access solutions, end-to-end enterprise security, info security risk, and compliance solutions. Today, Nimi is an in-house chief information security officer. He's responsible for IT infrastructure, IT operations, and information security. Our second panelist is Jason James. Jason has background in software development. Since 2009, Jason has run his own consulting firm, which focuses on providing CISO services with emphasis in risk management and compliance. Last but certainly not the least, our third panelist is Victor Monga. Victor has spent more than a decade between security technology companies, DoD contracts, and the private sector. He is a security technology vendor who advises security leaders how to tackle today's market's challenges using his company's solutions. So thank you all for our panelists and our attendees. Let's go ahead and dive into today's conversation. We are used to hearing acronyms like CIO, CISO, CSO, and CTO. Now the new acronym that we're hearing is CITO, which is Chief Information and Technology Officer. So what exactly is the CITO, and what are the key differences with this role? And is it basically just one role with way too many hats?
Maybe why don't you take that one?
Yeah, I think it's essentially the same thing, right? Whichever way you slice and dice it, there are two aspects to a security leader in technology. You're either protecting core technology or you're protecting the data. It's really that simple. CIOs historically have focused on the information, although in most organizations that also translates to technology. The CISO usually focuses on tech, but with security in mind, although a lot of CISOs tend to have a more programmatic background, and they focus on things like governance framework, compliance, regulatory controls, and so on. Chief Security Officers, CSO, in some organizations, that also spans physical security as well. And then you have new terms like CTSO, mainly used in Europe for Chief Technology Security Officer, and CITO, which is the Chief Information Technology Officer. And in both of those roles, it tends to be more focused on infrastructure platforms, all of the plumbing behind the scenes that runs your organization. But then I think the key thing to mention is it does depend on how big your organization is and how broad the leadership team is. Because irrespective of what those letters are in your title, you may end up being responsible for security as well as technology. It really depends. And I think that variance in the role is kind of what we're going to be talking about today.
As an outsider, I'll say a few things and then I'll pass it on to Jason about this. I've seen CIOs becoming CISOs and CISOs becoming CIOs over and over. And it all boils down to two things, at least as an outsider. I've never held a role for CIO nor CISO. But what I see is it's two things. One, about that person. Either they have the mindset about as they want to make sure the data is protected and they have that security mindset, and they were pushed into the IT part because it always boils down to that, how do you want to put the IT controls to security? Or it's the other way around, that IT leaders starting to realize that, okay, now we need to think about security, and then they become CISOs. I think that's what I have seen over and over again, CIOs shifting to CISOs, CISOs shifting to CIO, and we'll talk more about it as we continue this discussion. But at the end of the day, I think the terms can be anything, to Nami's point, but at the same time, their role about either data protection, following the data, where it's going and how to protect it, and that mindset about governance. And second is the IT compensating controls, how to put it around those.
I agree. Thank you. We hope that each of those roles exists within a business. I think there's the necessity for a CIO and a CTO and a CISO. However, I think that the difficulty is that if you look at a small firm, they maybe just don't have the budget to carry the three roles, so they'll hire one individual who's perhaps got a diverse resume. Or you look at a larger organization and they realize that, at that level, and I've seen a lot of, CTOs and CIOs who, as executives of a multi-billion-dollar organization, really don't have any hands-on role in technology. They're an executive. They run budgets, they run staff, they run an organization, they report to a board and a CEO, and their subordinates are performing the majority of those tasks. So there's a lot of influences that affect a business and a decision on which of those roles they should have and how many of those roles. And I think the worst case scenario that I've seen, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit more, is the organization that has the role filled specifically just to meet a compliance need or an external requirement. That again is something that I've seen, and we'll probably expand on a little bit more as we go through this panel.
Thank you. Nimi, I'd like to ask this next question to you. You're currently a CISO. How do you juggle and find balance between IT, cybersecurity, business objectives? Do you run into conflicts in your overall objectives to maintain the overall security of the organization that you are currently with?
Yeah, I think as a security professional, especially in a leadership position, conflicts and juggling is perhaps the biggest part of the role that you have to navigate. Because if you think about progressive organizations that are looking to move forward, their focus is always on innovation, digital transformation. I mean, a few years ago, I almost felt sick to the stomach whenever I went for like conference and someone came up and talked about digital transformation again. Right, because a lot of times when they come up with all those buzzwords, it runs in conflict, almost direct conflict with securing the organization, because the organization wants to move really fast. The organization wants to do things that are leading edge. And when you think about new products, for those who've worked in product development, security is often the last thing on their mind. They're focused on getting it to work. They're focused on just delivering whatever that business value is. So the first thing that a modern CISO needs to do is, how do you secure the business whilst keeping pace with the rate of change? And there's a clip that I saw on LinkedIn sometime, and it was meant to be funny, but really kind of sums up what we do. And it was a bunch of folks changing the tire on a rickshaw whilst it was moving, right? And that's essentially what we need to do. And that's a fine balancing act. So my advice is stay in line with the business objectives. If you understand what the strategic imperatives of your organization are, if you understand what the, maybe you have a 2, 3, or 5 year strategic roadmap, if you understand that and align your security program to that roadmap, then you're not likely to be chasing from too far behind. The other thing that can lead to conflicts or a lot of juggling is the reporting structure. To your original question, Ilbert, if in my case, for instance, I report into the CIO, and we have a great relationship and work really well together. But as I often tell him, my biggest problem half the time is him, right? Because there's all these wonderful things that he comes up with that I have to enable him do. Also, because I'm kind of the CIO because I lead the bulk of IT, and so getting out of my way and making sure that I'm not tripping up with myself is pretty much half the job that I have to do. But takeaway here is stay tight on your strategic business imperatives and don't do security to stop the business from moving forward. Think of security like brakes in a sports car, right? You put brakes in a sports car so you can drive fast, not so you can stop, right? And if you know that you have the right controls in place, then you allow the organization to move forward. But you know that if you do need to stop or take a turn, you can do that because you have the framework, you have the controls, you have the mechanisms in place that allow you to do that.
That is great feedback. Thank you. Jason, you have quite a unique perspective. What have you seen from the different clients that you have worked with in the past? For example, state versus local government to private and public entities. What influences do regulators, shareholders, customers have on the objectives of the CITO?
Well, first of all, it's kind of an interesting resume because if you think about it, the technology officer may be the person who's involved in and managing a development function, a software selection function, a procurement function, an administrative function of, maybe a large ERP, just a whole plethora of sort of technology application rules and roles and responsibilities. And then this information officer, maybe has networks, firewalls, routers, switches, security products. If you don't have a CISO, and obviously a lot of organizations don't have a dedicated CISO, so they have the whole security organization under their umbrella. So when you start to combine those two rules and roles together, you get almost a contradiction and some conflict in what they're trying to achieve. One trying to, as Nimi said, trying to meet the objectives of the business in a sort of a streamlined approach, and the other one ultimately just trying to keep the applications afloat. It's not necessarily the sort of the smartest combination of roles, but what I've seen from the various business entities, so I've put the shareholders and customers and investors and regulators, because all of these outside influences have a very different sort of impact on this individual and their role. You may have a customer that has expectations of uptime and delivery capabilities and performance, and their technical services agreement or their master services agreement needs to be met, and they're coming in and performing their annual audits, and so there's a whole sort of external sort of information pressure that's being applied by that third party, whether it's a customer or regulator. The shareholders are obviously not necessarily impacting the CIO and the CTO directly, but actually probably affecting the board. So now we've got that management pressure pushing down, looking for either increased performance through application development or application procurement, or impact that may be affected from some sort of breach or some sort of other activity that has a negative impact on the reputation of the organization. So we have the customers and the investors are also pushing that way. The primary difference, I guess, between the public and the private and the government is transparency. In the government, everything that they do is transparent. The public domain has a major impact on their decision making, and I think my impression is that a lot of CITOs in the government and agency world are very conservative about the moves that they make as a result of that sort of external the fact that everything they do is extremely transparent. Whereas what you get in the private arena is almost the complete opposite, a very sort of cavalier and reactive approach to technology management and technology change, because they don't have the eyes on them. They may be a smaller business. They may not have any, a senior board or a board with a lot of experience, and they're making a lot of changes in a very fluid and very sort of dynamic way. I don't know which is necessarily better. The conservative one, keeps the ship straight and afloat, or the rapid change one that potentially has the ups and downs, the pros and cons of dynamic change. But typically, depending on who you're working with, you'll see a very different type of resume and a very different type of individual aligning themselves with that career path of either a public or private, public or a government agency over sort of the small and fluid private organization.
Thank you for that. Victor, both Nimi and Jason mentioned a structure of the IT departments. Now you're on the vendor side. Can you discuss the distributed versus centralized IT approach, and what are the pros and cons of each approach?
Yeah, sure. So as a vendor, as outsider, again, I have seen distributed, centralized, and decentralized. So it's always been, again, boiling down to, we started with the internet where things were all distributed and we connected them centrally. And then we came to a conclusion that as we have grown these organizations, the IT department has to be centrally located somewhere. And then we realized during COVID time as well that it has to be distributed. So as a vendor, I have seen pros and cons of both items. First, obviously, we have seen it where you put the boundaries and you know exactly where your data is. You put your crown jewels right behind the firewall and the controls and the all sorts of security platform solutions you can buy, and you put that layers. So defense in depth, the concept we have it. The concept is really good for centralized IT to defense in depth, because you can actually create that depth and put your crown jewels or data or whatever you're trying to protect for your company or organization. It works really good. But on the flip side, now with COVID and agility and the applications are moving way faster and shadow ITs and all sorts of things that comes in picture, now we need distributed as well. Distributed is really good for agile. Distributed really good, people can manage it from any geolocation. Distributed IT can be really good for expanding the team, shrinking it when you don't need it, all pros, right? The con is now, there's no boundary. That castle approach we used to have it doesn't exist anymore. So first of all, you really need to know exactly where data is flying. The supply chain, the vendor management comes really important now. So if everything is central IT, sure, you may have a weak vendor management portfolio. It's working because people can hear each other, they can see, they can whiteboard. They could really get into the nitty-gritty of what's happening with your crown jewels. With distributed model, you can't see it. I can go in and start an EC2 using my credit card or company credit card and start putting my data over there. How would a security leader would know that IT has started this new EC2 or AWS account? So both items have pros and cons. It all boils down to organization's risk appetite statement. If they think their crown jewels must be centrally located and put behind that castle approach or defense in depth with that boundaries, then yeah, go with central, because you can put all of your defenses right where it's needed, central. At the same time, the company approaches that maybe they want to be aggressive to go to market. Maybe the development lifecycle needs that aggressive approach of distributed, then that's the default answer. Then they must go with that distributed approach of IT. For security, it's always been challenging because we're playing catch up. Business decides something, IT goes in and does it, and then security comes in and they have to talk to both IT and business and try to justify to make sure that we keep that risk management and we keep that risk profile low as much as we can.
That's good feedback. Thank you. So now I'd like to engage our attendees. Let's go ahead and ask and post a question. And Victor is going to help out here. So the question is, how many people find themselves getting pulled in different directions, which results in the reduction of security controls for the convenience of either IT operations or the business?
Do we get to vote as well? Maybe, Jason?
No, we can't. I don't think so.
Mhm.
All right, let's just give it a few more, like one more minute, and then we can chat about, have a conversation about the results.
I won the job of the 3 people that are not getting pulled in different directions.
What if you get 3 different paychecks, maybe? How about that? Would you then consider that?
Oh yeah, bring it
Yeah.
on.
Now it's 4.
Geez, 4 lucky people. I envy
I
you.
think we have 100% in.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's going up.
I'll go ahead and close the poll, and I will share the results with everybody. There you go. So 60% people said yes, that's them. They felt that's them. 40% people are thinking that they got it. They don't feel like they're getting pulled into different directions, so they have the marching orders. They're going in the right direction.
And that could be to do with the level. I think the people being pulled are typically at a manager or above level where they're starting to have external influences affect directly the work that they're performing. And I think that becomes sort of part and parcel of that movement up in the company. All of a sudden, you have different stakeholders that know that you can be influenced and want to have some influence over that work that you do.
Yep.
There's also the possibility of, for especially with ISACA being really diverse, if you're working, say, an internal audit position or a compliance-based position, then, for the most part, a lot of what you do is fixed. You have your guardrails of the areas you focus on. You have your schedules for audits and all of that, which doesn't turn to get, too much variance year on year. But if you're working in sort of core IT, then yeah, that's this tends to be fairly normal across core IT folks. So interesting spread.
Isn't that the word that we used to use for, it's called job security, when people are pulling you in different directions? Yeah, job security.
That's true.
And Nimi, you were going to answer a question, I think, that came in.
Oh yeah, we do. Sophia, hopefully I got that right. Asked a question about if the information security department should be part of IT. If it's part of IT, does that result in separation of duty issues? And she said, should InfoSec be part of risk and compliance? So now there is no answer to this. I have literally done keynotes about this one topic, and I just want to get that out of the way. There is no perfect answer. The closest to a perfect situation you would get is if you have information security represented at the board level. So the CISO essentially is one of the leaders of the organization and is represented at the table. That's the ideal scenario. Every other scenario has pros and cons, right? If you take the scenario where information security is part of IT, that's great because IT generally has a larger spend for most organizations. That's where all the technology is. That's where the data is. That's where the risk is. So the closer you are to IT, the better it can be for you to do your work. Now, that does depend to a great deal the type of relationship you have with your boss. If your boss is proposing a project that you deem as high risk, or just why in the world would we do this? And you don't have the relationship, the confidence, skin in the game, whatever you want to call it, to be able to have a conversation with your boss to say, this is silly, don't do it, right? Then you end up just playing second fiddle and you're not really doing your job justice. Now, to your question about risk and compliance, I've often said, and I think most of us here would agree, that compliance has never equated to security. And so the risk is that if you become part of the risk and compliance department, then security almost becomes a checkbox exercise, right? You do your SOC 2 reports, you do your ISO 27001 NIST, you get an external auditor, you have a really nice plaque on the wall that says you're compliant. But what does that really mean? Because the fact that you did an assessment once a year, you do a surveillance audit, say once every 3 years, that doesn't make you secure. It may make you compliant to a bunch of regulations. Now, I started out doing audits and all that, so I'm not by any stretch knocking auditors or compliance. It's extremely necessary. And as I've always said, if you do a compliance or risk assessment with the original intent for which the standard was designed, then you end up actually making yourself secure. But the truth is, a lot of organizations simply do it for the sake of doing it, right? And if there's one good takeaway from all of that, another thing that I say is, at worst case scenario, use your compliance program to fund your security program. Because a lot of organizations, even if when they don't care about security, they don't understand security, they'll understand the needs to meet regulatory compliance, especially if you're in a regulated industry. So you can use that to do it. But the bottom line is that it really comes down to the people in the role, their understanding of the role, and the support that you get among your peers and your superiors. Where you report to helps, but there is no perfect science to it.
That's a great answer. Very informative. Thank you for that.
Awesome. Thank you, Nimi.
You're welcome. Thank you.
The next topic that I would like to talk about is we often see security leaders are kept out of the boardrooms rather than being part of the overall organization's strategic developments and future goals and plans. I like to discuss what impact does the reporting structure play into the overall effectiveness of a CISO or other titles such as CITO.
First on this one, and actually it's kind of funny because this question has a lot to do with that segregation of duties that Nimi was just talking to. I think if we go back to the SOX days, which are still around, but they don't necessarily play in as much influence now. We looked at that chief audit executive and we said, they're reporting to the CFO because this is a financial audit, and a lot of these chief audit executives were hired as a result of that audit. But they should have this dotted line. So, we have this audit committee and now we've got some independence, but the payroll and the direct management role was still a CFO. And that was a little difficult because you're auditing someone who ultimately you're reporting to. And I think similar with the CISO and the CITO. So you've got the CISOs reporting to IT, and to a certain degree, as Nimi was saying, you're either part of the team or you're independent and you're assessing the team, the IT team, to identify security vulnerabilities and weaknesses. Which of those do you want to be? So if you're completely independent of IT, and let's say you have a dotted line to the CEO or the COO, which is more likely, then that gives you that independence, and maybe at some point you're going to whistle blow and say, look, IT is just going left base, and we're at great risk of ransomware or some sort of breach, and I need to go directly past the CIO and take it to executive management. But I feel like that short-term value that you get is not worth the loss of that relationship with your CIO. The CIO can empower CISOs by giving them access to logs, by giving them access to security products, by, as Nimi says, by allocating budget to their department, by making the resources available, because not all security departments know how to use the various applications and the various assets that are that you're meant to be assessing. So You know how to you might know how to use a vulnerability scanner or something like Darktrace, but you may not know how to use a Palo Alto product or a Palo Alto firewall itself. So they can hide things from you, or they can be very transparent. So I guess for me, I've seen both sides. I've seen CISOs who are part of departments but don't necessarily have that C-level and board level access. But because they're integrated into the CIOs or the CTOs team in a collaborative way, it's not that big a deficit. They don't necessarily have to circumvent. They can go directly to the CIO. They can explain. They can reason. And they can communicate. And then I've seen the ones that are, almost totally independent, who I think are less functional and sort of more reactive to incidents as they occur. Now, if when I'm trying to work in this environment, I do play mediator, and the question is, do I mediate between CIOs and CISOs and boards all the time? And a lot of reasons why consultants like myself are brought in is because one of those departments feels that they're not necessarily getting heard. They can get budget for an external assessment, and they feel like whatever report it is that I'm going to create is going to be the power, and I think Nimi said that as well, is going to be the power that they're going to use to leverage for either someone to listen to them or to get some additional budget for security products or technology products. I don't like to necessarily be a mediator. But what I can do is through development of good technology and security practices is develop communication paths that I can use as a sort of a lead behind. One of the ways that I typically like to do that is with steering committees. If you can develop out steering committees, whether it's something as simple as incident response or something more meaningful as sort of security as a whole. Bringing those various stakeholders into those meetings, facilitating the communication initially for however long that organization wants to keep me around there, and then ultimately, using that as a lead behind, that can have quite a transformational impact on the organization because they didn't necessarily have that line of communication. And a steering committee isn't a circumvent. It's not where I'm going to go round my boss, or I'm going to whistleblow on my boss because I don't feel like they're doing a good job. It truly is collaborative, and you can set it up in a way, if you really want to, that and we've done this with the ERM steering committees where there's anonymous suggestions put in, and then the group discusses them as a whole, and they don't necessarily know where the suggestion came from. There are a lot of different ways that security and information officers and boards and executives communicate, and not all of them are functional. And you can see that, I think, once you do some form of assessment on the organization, it becomes very apparent very quickly that they're siloed, and there is an opportunity to remediate. That's it.
Kind of going back to Nimi, you are currently an in-house CISO. How are you empowered as a security leader within your current organization?
That's a good question. Let me put it this way. If you are empowered as a CISO, then you are one lucky person. I think a lot of times you have got to empower yourself. And the way that you do that is by building relationships, by building your brand. And this is the key, by adding value. And I'm going to give some examples here. When I joined my organization a few years ago, I was dragged into a board meeting, and this was to do with credentialing, right? It was to do, so I work in a medical type environment. We spend a ton of time credentialing doctors so they can come work in one of our practices. And on average, it was taking 17 days to onboard a clinician, to onboard a doctor. And so I come in and they're telling me all of these things on how much they're losing money. For those of you who worked in healthcare, everything is calculated pretty much by average daily production. It's like for every day that this one doctor is not credentialed and not able to see a patient, this is how much money we're losing. So anyway, I go through all of that and it's like, okay, well, I do have a solution. Like, okay, tell us, because we've been trying to solve this for so long and we haven't been able to do anything about it. Like, we're going to bring on a single sign-on solution. We're going to integrate it with Workday, which is our, master record system. And then we implemented another automation RPA solution, or BPM solution in this case, Pega. And I can mention the customer's names, vendor names. So we use Okta, we use Workday, and we use Pega. So we integrated these three solutions together. So what was a process where people were sending emails from one department to the other, things were getting missed, things were sitting in people's inboxes unread, and resulting in the business losing a ton of money. We went from that to integrating iCIMS, which is our recruiting system. So as soon as the doctor goes in and accepts their offer and submits whatever paperwork needs to be done, the status, I was told today, it's status in America, not status. Anyway, the status changes in Workday. And then as soon as that happens, that triggers Okta. Okta does all their credentialing, all the work that needs to be done. Pega triggers the whole thing. And in a matter of 2 or 3 days, the entire process is done. Sounds really basic. Most of us are doing exactly what I just described, nothing fantastic. But that was a bunch of security solutions and business process automation solutions that we strung together. But for the business, I was solving a doctor credentialing problem. In the meantime, I solved a whole bunch of security problems without even having to sell security to my organization. That's really the key. If you can add value and help advance your organization's strategic imperatives, and you can solve real business problems, and every time they hear from the security team is not telling them you're not compliant, or you failed this phishing test, or you have to go from 6-digit passwords to 26 characters and it's going to be alphanumeric and all this fancy stuff, and you've got to change it every 12 days. That's the impression people have of security. We just set more and more hurdles in the way of them being able to do their job. If you can change that narrative within your organization, then you really empower yourself, because now people come to you. And, we've talked a little bit today about where should the CISO sit. I was listening to it was actually one of the past presidents, let's just say. I'm not political, so I will not mention who it was. But I was listening to him speak in a really small room a few years ago. And one of the things he said was that when you see this war room pictures, and I'm sure most of us, and I can see some service personnel here, so this would make sense to them at least, that around his table, when he's having his cabinet meetings, every single person who is sitting on that table is appointed by him. But behind, just going off the table to the ends of the room, if you can picture that, are a lot of people, usually holding a lot of big folders, a lot of documents. None of those people are political appointees. Those are the folks that serve all the various different precedents and all that. And the point is, every time he is stuck at a decision where he needs a tough decision answered, or he needs to get an impartial view of a question, he just points to one of those guys or ladies sitting on the edge. Because these people go into meetings after meetings and half the time not expecting to be spoken to. The civil servants, they're not important, they're not up the chain. And the first thing that usually comes out of their mouth is the truth, right? Because it's not political, it's not rehearsed, it's not planned. And if you think about that and how that applies to security, don't worry about whether you're reporting into the board. Don't worry too much about whether you have a seat at the table. Make sure you're in the room where the conversations are being held, because ultimately you may be one of those civil servants where the president turns around and says, "Hey, you, what do you think?" And sometimes that's the in you need. That's the invite you need to make your voice heard. And you've got to take advantage of those opportunities when they get presented to you. So a little bit of a long-winded answer, to apologize, but I hopefully that answers your question and you can take some nuggets from there.
That is a great answer. Thank you so much. Victor, you have a slightly different view for you as a security practitioner. What are your thoughts on different hierarchies and structures?
Yeah, sure. I think as a vendor, when we look at an organization, and there are always two things it comes to. Either organization is reaching out to us to buy a tool or security platform, or we're reaching out to organization. And in both cases, it's about either IT or security. So either IT is onboarded a solution and security comes in and they vet the solution, how they can use the security features of it. Or a security brings on a solution and then IT figures out how to implement it. Now, all that depends on maturity of the organization. And you may have heard of this a lot of times. Each vendor has their own way of actually going into tiers of customers, like could be enterprise, or it could be something that they have a junior level salesperson. So point is that when it comes to hierarchy, you can pick any hierarchy. It could be CIO reporting to CISO, CISO reporting to CIO, or CISO reporting to CEO or the board. It all boils down to business requirement. Where are they putting their priorities and what is their risk appetite? That's what it boils down to. And the maturity of the organization. So let's say an organization just got hit ransomware, all of a sudden priority becomes security, security, security. A lot of money is funneling through, and security team is now enabled to go in and put those compensating controls that they wanted to. But they do need IT at the end of the day. So when it comes to that, then who does actually report to board that, hey, yes, you gave us the money, we have done this good with that money. On the flip side, if an organization is mature enough, they have vendor management, supply chain already going on, but now they're really focusing on the next part, the governance, and the part where they're being proactive. That's where maybe security, or could be risk and governance, reporting to the board. And as a vendor, we on board as, and we come in as to provide our insights of the organization, how to use the platform, and how they are going to get the maximum out of that platform. I'll say this one last thing, and then maybe we could talk about this slide. The way I, as an outsider, have seen this over and over about the hierarchies, there are always usually different levels. First is security is as cost center. Someone is keeping the lights on. We need a line item, budget item. It could be that, okay, $1 million, or based on the organization, they have a line item, cost center. Second comes in as a guard, roadblock, if you will. And that's where they come in, and security guys become anything you want to do in the organization. They come in and they say, no, I want to install Azure. No, I want to go to cloud. No, I want to go to Okta. No, even though it's something that they can actually use, they start with no because they're security. It's just their persona. It has become that way. The organization needs them to be. They become that guard of the organization, and they try to say no. Third level is the technologist. That's where the security and IT team are really working together, and the hierarchy is working well together for the organization. Security team is using IT actively, and security team is actually trying to balance the business needs of it. And finally, the enabler, where Nami talked about the example, where he goes in, he sits in the boardroom, and he actually fixes a business problem using IT tools. Along the way, he achieved security. He reduced the risk he had for the organization. And I think that's the mature organization. That's the security leaders. I think the ideal candidate, that's where most organizations would want to be. Now, once you are there, it doesn't mean you can go change organization. Priorities might change, the personnel might change. So I would say the hierarchies and the priorities and everything boils down to the maturity of the organization. Maybe back to you for the slide.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I wasn't, I just put this on here because like we've been saying, there is no perfect model here. It depends on the person first. It depends on the organization, it depends on maturity. But I put this on here because this kind of shows you in blue the pros and some of the benefits, if you like. And then it kind of shows and read some of the things that if you're reporting into those different areas, some of the things that the CEO, the CISO in this case, must be capable of doing, and some of the risk that are involved. So for some of you, perhaps who are thinking about where this fits, think about this picture, right? Because depending on the reporting structure, there are benefits and there are disadvantages as well. So I'll leave this on if someone wants to grab a screenshot, or this might help.
Yeah, we can leave it until we actually launch the next poll.
Okay, let's go ahead and ask our attendees and post the second question, which is, where do you think CISO and CITO should report to?
It's a religious fight, I think, Naomi, right? When it comes to reporting structure, I think.
Yeah.
But it's good to hear the feedback from audience where they think that CISO should report to, or the hierarchy should be.
Agree.
I see a few people agree with my COO. I've seen that. I've actually seen that as an alternative to the CIO to give that independence, but also not necessarily have that dotted line straight past the executive.
Yeah, there was actually a study by Ponemon Institute, and I think majority of the organizations, CISOs still report to CIO because it's a default choice because of IT budget and IT implementation, IT projects, vendor management of IT. Everything I think boils down to IT. So that's why most organizations choose that. By the same time, as I said, based on the maturity, priority, it does switch every now and then.
Yeah.
All right, I will end the poll and I will share results with everyone, and then we can move on. Yeah, 67% are nominating CEOs for the default choice. So.
My only concern there is that the CEO having the relevant skill set to, and this is kind of what we're going to be talking about next, maybe, so I shouldn't jump ahead, is the understanding of the necessarily the same conversation. But let's answer that question. Ask that question.
Okay, so for the next topic, I'll open this question to all three panelists. Information security and IT often speak a different language than the language that's utilized in the boardroom. How should a CISO or CITO communicate with the boards? What tips can you share with us?
Sure. Yeah, I guess that's where I was about to go. Is while I agree having that dotted line to the CEO is good, I think there's a lot of firms out there where the CEO would have either little interest in actually having a conversation with the CISO. They should, because they're the chief risk officer to the extent that they make the biggest decisions that influence the biggest directions in the organization. And if they're not listening to all of their leaders, they're not making those decisions in a fully informed manner. But unfortunately, it's a fact that a lot of CISOs don't necessarily either have the executive skill sets necessary to communicate with another executive at that level in a way that is meaningful to them, or they don't have that dotted line. I think if we look back again at that example I used of the chief audit executive, when Sarbanes-Oxley got really hot and heavy, there was a lot of people leaving at a manager level in the Big Four and becoming chief audit executives of clients that they previously audited. And then all of a sudden having to make presentations at a board level and an executive level, and they weren't able to take what was pretty detailed audit results and audit findings and audit strategy and audit communications from and put them in a way that a board could take meaningful information away and make strategic decisions. And that's a skill set that takes time. So maybe there's a reason why a CIO and a CITO who invariably has a lot of executive experience and perhaps has been reporting to that level for a significant period of time ends up being sort of a mediator to those CEOs. And as you can see, I'll let Nimi talk to the slide, but there's a specific skill set that doesn't necessarily get trained while you're moving through the sort of the IT security and IT sort of management roles. One of the things that we've always been a big fan of here at ISACA is people volunteering and taking opportunities to present, because that unique skill set is not something that you necessarily get trained on. And that's another reason why they bring consultants like myself in, is because I can take what is basically technical talk and put it into some sort of meaningful PowerPoint that an executive can use to, again, make those decisions.
That is a really good point. I mean, I put this up just to really to jog your memory. As you look at this slide, where do you fall? And there's nothing wrong to start with. There's absolutely nothing wrong with whether you are more like the left or more like the right. But to Jason's point, they are different. A lot of us in IT, and I'm going to put myself in the IT bucket now. A lot of us in IT want to fix things. We're tactical. We want to solve things now. Whereas when you speak to the board, they're more interested in strategic approach. We're so fascinated with metrics within IT and service ops and IT operations, performance, uptime, capacity, incident rates, downtime. This is literally the language that we use. In the board, they don't really care about that. It's usually about profit and loss. We talk about threats and vulnerabilities. A lot of you guys from a technical background would resonate with this, or this resonates with you. To the execs, is about risk and impact. They don't really care that there's a vulnerability and this emotet or hafnium or WannaCry. They don't care about all of that. What does it mean for my business? Are we at risk? And what's the impact going to be if this threat comes through? We are focused on product design rather than a platform strategy. We manage incidents every day. I would even say to some degree, we manage events, not even incidents. At the board level, we're looking at crisis. And then I love this one, the 64,000 feet versus deep dive, right? In IT, we're always deep diving. Hey, let's deep dive and let's get into the root cause. They don't care,
Mm-hmm.
They want to look at the 64,000 feet view. They want to disrupt, they want to change, they want to, I talked about digital disruption and transformation and how I was just so over that particular phrase. A lot of us want to run, maintain, right? I think Victor mentioned earlier on keeping the lights on. That's such an IT phrase. It's like, just keep the lights on, right? Don't rock the boat. Doesn't work for a lot of execs, unless you have a lot of technical people who end up being execs. Then of course you speak the same language. And then finally, opportunities in disguise. So like I say, nothing wrong. You just need to understand if you are in a role where you're communicating or you're reporting into or you're invited into speak to the leadership, the executives, tailor your conversation. The last thing I will leave in this, if you're doing a board or executive presentations, keep it simple, right? Someone told me once upon a time, 7 words per line, 5 words per slide, no more than 3 takeaway messages. That's all your execs can deal with. Don't go in there with your fancy animations and all the breakdown and all the transitions. Not interested. Just keep it simple, and you'll be fine when you're communicating with the leadership team. So
I know about that towards the end of the session. So I'll say this thing to wrap this up. If you are brought in and you are the one building security program, then you want to ask the executives why. Because again, you want to be on the same page. As Alibra asked the question, we speak different languages, and there's nothing wrong with it. We should. If you are from a technical background and if you are going to fix problems using technical solutions, you should speak that language. At the same time, as a security leader, you need to also translate business impact, as Nami mentioned, the threats for business executives as well. That's where you as a leader comes in. Now, if you actually inherit security problems, I would say not problem, at that point, make friends. My dad always said it, if you need something from someone, make it easier for them. You go in, to Nami's point, transition slides and all fancy things and language. You may impress one or two people, you may not get a buy-in. You want to get buy-in, understand their problems, and then present the solution. Again, make friends so that you can speak the common language. There is no point, nobody's going to win this war if we all going to have to actually go in and speak our own words.
Sounds good. Thank you for that. So we only have about a minute or so left. Let's open it to the audience. If you have any questions, comments.